Good evening, Exiles. Ervin here, and welcome to my guide to all you need to know about breaches. I'm going to be working my way through everything, starting with basic information regarding the mechanic, progressively working towards more advanced topics. For this reason, there are some helpful chapters left in the description below, so you can skip around the video to the section that reflects your current knowledge of the game if you don't need to hear the basic stuff. With that out of the way, though, let's do it. Starting off, what exactly is a breach? Well, a breach is one of the four current endgame league mechanics available in the early access launch of Path of Exile 2. They appear as purple hands both on your Atlas overworld map as well as during the gameplay within the map itself, spawning somewhere within. If you get within about 1 to 2 screens from the breach's location, you'll see streams of pink coming from the direction, which can sometimes allow you to navigate to your breaches more easily. Upon activating the hand, a breach will open, allowing you to combat a horde of monstrosities from another dimension in an expanding circle filled to the brim with them. This includes truckloads of additional normal monsters, some magic monsters, and even extra rare monsters to slay in your maps. There are also clasped hands that are opened by running over them during the breach that'll drop additional loot for you to grab as well. The breach circle will continue expanding and releasing additional monsters into your map for a period of time that is greatly influenced and extended by the amount of breach monsters you actually manage to slay during the breach itself. So the more you kill and the faster you kill them, the longer the breach is going to last, potentially extending all the way to the map's edges should you secure a high enough kill streak. All right, so what are the benefits of playing for breaches? First and foremost, you get a lot more experience and loot from your map due to all of the additional monsters, meaning faster leveling, more currency, and potential gear drops to use or sell. This has increased significantly if running a lot of rarity in your gear, as you've probably heard. However, I feel rarity is likely to catch a nerf in the near future, and I've still been profiting decently from breaches without an excessive amount of it. So even if you don't buy into the rarity meta, know that you're still going to be profiting a solid amount of additional currency and items from this mechanic that you would have missed out on otherwise. Among your breach loot, you're also going to be getting breach rings, which can become the strongest and most sought after rings in the game for many builds, due to their unique ability to raise a stat group on the ring by 50% through quality, unlike other accessories which max out at 20%. This is achieved by utilizing a unique currency type called catalysts, which can be used to raise the stat groups on your accessories through increasing their quality. Something very much worth doing, as it'll overall improve your character by a significant amount. If you want to make a profit off of this additional currency drop by converting it to exalts, most of these are pretty cheap or borderline worthless. Zoth, Carapace, Flesh, Esh, Yulnatul's, Sibilants, and Chayula, as well as skittering catalysts, are all priced for very little exalts at the currency exchange. However, Neural, Adaptive, Reaver, and Toll catalysts all convert for a bit of extra exalts at the currency exchange, although it's still nothing too crazy. For this reason, I recommend either hiding the less valuable catalysts in your loot filter should you have one, or reforging them, as catalysts being reforged results in other random catalysts potentially converting your worthless ones into the ones that are actually worthwhile to trade in with the currency exchange. The other unique currency dropped by Breach maps is going to be the Breach Splinters. These splinters are currently about 1/4 of an exalt each, which doesn't seem like much, but similar to the catalysts, this does end up adding up should you choose to sell them. Although instead of selling them, I advise stacking them until you get 300 to form a Breachstone. Breachstones are how you engage with the other part of the league mechanic. By using a breachstone on the realm gate, you can enter the Twisted Domain. Inside the Twisted Domain, you'll fight off a breach that expands across the entirety of the map. During this breach, there will be a timer at the top of your screen, and you must finish clearing to the end before it runs out. Otherwise, you will fail the challenge entirely. Afterwards, you're going to face off in a pinnacle encounter against Zesht, We That Are One.
I am the one who knocks.
Defeating this boss the first time should be relatively easy, but he will get stronger each time you face him until the fourth encounter. Each time you defeat Zesht, you'll be rewarded 2 more Atlas points for your Breach Atlas, as well as potentially the Hands of Wisdom in Action Furtive Wraps, a very powerful glove item used by quite a few meta builds in the game at the moment, worth 2 to 4 divines at the time of recording. The pool, however, is muddied with quite a few undesirable uniques, making this boss unideal to farm for drops. But you should slay him 4 times to max out your Breach Atlas as soon as your character is capable of doing so. Before we get into the Atlas, though, let's first talk about how you're actually going to be getting your hands on the Breachstones you need, as well as how you can maximize the amount of loot, experience, and enemy spawn rate within your breaches. You'll see breach map modifiers out in the wild on your Atlas without any effort on your part, but we can maximize the amount of breaches available on our Atlas map by inserting breach tablets into the various towers around the map after clearing to them. Breach tablets drop during breaches themselves. So, although you can go around doing the natively spawned breaches on your map to get some, it's not a bad idea to pick some up from the trade site for 1 exalt apiece to get yourself started and start a snowball, especially because we ideally want to be utilizing generally good tablets, as setting up these towers and map nodes is going to represent a significant time investment on our part. We want to make sure we're getting the most out of it as a result. So, try to always use breach tablets that will add breaches to between 8 and 10 maps apiece and have good prefixes and suffixes. If you have breach tablets with no modifiers on them, be sure to use orbs of transmutation and augmentation to give it some. As far as what prefixes and suffixes you want on your tablets, generally everything is useful here except for gold find and additional clasped hands, with the very best modifier being your maps which contain breaches have X% chance to contain an additional breach, which stacks additively with itself. Once you start to get an excessive amount of precursor and breach tablets, you can also start smashing them together should they have low amounts of maps influenced or just undesirable modifiers. You can do this at the Reforger by inserting 3 of the same type of tablet. You'll be given a brand new one with a new set of modifiers that can potentially be more useful to you than the 3 you smashed together. When setting up several towers to juice up an area with breaches, you want to be clearing paths to the towers, utilizing as many maps that are bad for breach gameplay as possible. Maps like Crypt, Forge, Valve Factory, and basically any map that's just long hallways, as these maps prevent a large portion of our breach monsters spawning into the game. By clearing these types of maps to get to our towers, we're then able to deploy our breach tablets, preventing these bad maps from receiving our precious breaches, instead ensuring they go to better maps within the tower's radius. Now, once we've set up our network of overlapping towers and inserted a mix of breach and precursor tablets, we want to then make sure we're using Waystones with good modifiers for breach. Waystones being utilized for breach ideally want as many pack size modifiers as possible from prefixes, as this ensures wall to wall enemies once the breach begins, allowing us to make sure the breach lasts longer by landing more kills, as well as securing us even more loot. For the suffixes, you want to avoid having too many damage related modifiers, or of course, any modifiers that might brick your build. This is something I've talked about in my previous video where I not only go over what map suffixes you should avoid, but also how to set up your character to be prepared for endgame content. Once you've selected your maps you'll be using for Breach, use Instilled Emotions to juice them up further by adding layers of Delirium. These come from completing maps with the Delirium Mirror League mechanic active and come in 10 different forms. But for the sake of this video, we'll focus on the cheaper ones as we're just looking to add a few extra mobs and a bit of extra loot on top of our already great setup. So we'll be using either Distilled Ire as the cheapest option, which is going to add more magic monsters to our map, or the slightly more expensive Distilled Guilt, which is going to add pack size in general to our map. No matter what you choose to distill your map with, it's also going to spawn additional delirium monsters and mirrors, which can provide us with yet another form of currency for our trouble in the form of simulacrum splinters. But this isn't a video about Delirium, so I'll just leave it at that. Basically, you're going to get more currency out of it, so you might as well do it. All right, so we've got a huge chunk of land on the map covered in overlapping breach modifiers and precursor tablet modifiers. We've got our maps with good prefixes and suffixes, as well as distilled emotions. We're now ready to reap the rewards and begin clearing some breaches. With that, I want to give you some tips for actually running these breaches to ensure you get the most out of them. First, when you can locate a breach within your map, take in your surroundings and plan out which direction you plan to push first, as we want to continually be pushing through the breach where the mobs are at their most dense rather than waiting on the edges for spawns. For this reason, when pushing through a breach, should you come to the edge of the circle, be sure to change directions and shift towards areas that have more chunks of enemies to kill. Next, do your best to always be circling around where you see rare mobs and magic mobs dying unless you have a way of neutralizing on death effects, as sprinting through spicy on death circles is a great way to throw away all the hard work that brought you to this moment. This can be quite a bit more challenging when the breach is taking place on a map full of hallways and narrow corridors, which is even more reason we want to avoid having our breaches placed on those maps. And lastly, you need to get yourself a loot filter before doing this. The game is going to get unplayably cluttered with maps this juiced up, so you are going to need a way to sift through the trash efficiently. Until Filter Blade is updated, which should be any day now, download the Neversink Light filter from the link below. Then, if you're at T15 maps, you can use my filter, which is available for download from my Discord and otherwise also available at yet another link below. Lastly, we're going to talk about how to best set up your Atlas tree for currency as well as your Breach tree to maximize your efficiency. This Atlas gives you the best mix of additional enemies through pack size modifiers, additional rare enemy modifiers, boosts to your Waystones and precursor tablets, and of course, additional item rarity and quantity. Keep in mind, however, this atlas is going to be a significant increase in difficulty of your maps in exchange for those improvements. And finally, the Breach Atlas. Your first 2 points should be spent towards crumbling walls, as this passive is going to make it possible for up to 11 breaches to spawn into your map on a 2% rate. And between the chance for additional breaches you'll likely have on your tablets and this passive, the likelihood of having at least two breaches in each of your maps becomes very high on average, more than doubling the value we get out of the breach mechanic attached to our map node for just our first 2 points. The next 4 points should be spent taking Frantic Invasion, which is going to increase the quantity of breach splinters dropped by breach monsters by a whopping 75%, although it does cause us to take 20% more damage. This is overall absolutely worth it, especially considering we can't otherwise move on to take Rising Pyre, which is just 40% more density during our breaches, giving us a lot more of everything from our content. There is finally a bit of choice in the final 2 points. You can either choose to take Grasping Hands, which increases the number of clasped hands by 50%, as well as adds another pack of monsters 25% of the time when activating the hands, or Sustained Siege, which slows the expanse and closure of the breach by 30%. Personally, I prefer Sustained Siege for a few really good reasons. Number one, Grasping Hands adds very little in the way of actual additional density to our breaches. Overall, with the infrequency, you'll get additional magic monster packs. Secondly, the extra clasped hands, even on extremely fast clearing builds, are never going to get you more splinters than Sustained Siege will. This is because no matter how strong your build is, you have to spend time traveling between packs of breach monsters. Otherwise, entire portions of the circle will remain uncleared. And without sustained siege, you won't be able to leave and let portions of the circle stack up for you to return to. By slowing down how fast the circle opens, we give ourselves substantially more time to actually clear the surface area of the breach, which continues to expand larger and larger. Effectively, no matter how good your clear speed is, you're going to miss large portions of potential mobs without this passive. Well, unless you're running Temporalis and have infinite blink, but like, why are you watching this video if you have that, right? Anyway, and those lost kills will have been far more valuable than the extra class pans and portions of potential mobs without this passive. And those lost kills will have been far more valuable than the extra class pans and magic packs will have been. The value is also even more apparent when you do play breaches on bad maps, where sustained siege is going to give you much more time to pivot and change directions, getting much more value out of your breaches than you'd have otherwise been able to on those bad maps. On a closing note, when it comes to the Breach Atlas, the Breachstones themselves are only about 70 exalts at the time of recording. So, if your character is already relatively strong and clearing tier 15 maps before you watch this video, you should absolutely get some or all of these points before beginning to juice up nodes for Breach. As although it'll still be a very profitable activity without the Atlas points, it's going to be substantially more profitable if you do have them. The low cost of the entry key compared to the other endgame activities also makes Breach by far the most accessible early on, while also being the most straightforward to benefit from, making it the ideal mechanic to invest in, especially for newer players. That is just about all you need to know about breaches in Path of Exile 2. I hope you found this video helpful, and if you did, I'd appreciate it if you left the video a like and shared it around, as it's the only way I'll be able to continue making content for the game. I also stream 3 times a week if anyone has any questions or would just like to come say hi. If you're curious what build I use to blast my way through all these breaches in the background, the link to my guide will also be down below with all the other links. Thank you to my coffee supporters who help keep the channel going, and thank you for watching till the end. I'll see you next time.